It's time now for our Scoop, our weekly conversation on international media. We look at who shapes a narrative, explore journalistic ethics, and ask our reporters the difficult questions. With trust in the press at a nadir, it's a critical eye on a critical profession. In his book 1984, George Orwell wrote, quote, "The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command." That dystopian novel has been referenced a lot lately, and I'd like you to hang on to this passage for the rest of this show. Now, over 3 weeks, federal agents killed 2 U.S. citizens in Minneapolis. On January 7th, Renee Good was shot 3 times in her forearm, her breast, and her head. She was unarmed. The New York Times was one of several media outlets to publish analysis of footage from various camera angles that contradicted claims by the Trump administration that the agent had fired defensive shots. Good's mother called Renee one of the kindest people she'd ever known. The Trump administration called her a domestic terrorist and a deranged lunatic. At a White House press briefing, a journalist was verbally assaulted for asking a question after Good's death. Take a look.
And Renee Good was shot in the head and killed by an ICE agent. How does that equate to them doing everything correctly?
Why was Renee Good unfortunately and tragically killed?
Are you asking me my opinion? Because an ICE agent acted recklessly and killed her unjustifiably.
Oh, okay. So you're a biased reporter with a left-wing opinion.
What do you want me to do?
Yeah, because you're a left-wing hack. You're not a reporter. You're posing in this room as a journalist, and it's so clear by the premise of your question. And you and the people in the media who have such biases but fake like you're a journalist, you shouldn't even be sitting in that seat.
A second fatal shooting was that of Alex Pretti. When the 37-year-old nurse was armed, he had the correct permit and did not draw his weapon. Just like with Renee Good, the Trump administration vilified Pretti as a domestic terrorist. But just like with Good, multiple media outlets like NBC News once again published frame-by-frame analysis of various camera angles, challenging the federal government's version of events, prompting the Minnesota governor to say this.
You have the most powerful people in the federal government spinning stories. Thank God we have video, because according to DHS, these 7 heroic guys took an onslaught of a battalion against them or something. It's nonsense, people.
The governor also urged Minnesotans to record ICE agents with their phones. His message was a lead in the Reliable Sources newsletter by CNN's Brian Stilter, who wrote, quote, "Almost every recent altercation involving federal agents has been captured by multiple cameras, providing angles that sometimes contradict President Trump's incendiary claims." On The Daily Show, Jon Stewart called out the administration.
And to add insult to injury is the denial of the reality that we all witnessed. They're lying. We saw it. And that's how brazen they lie when they know we've seen the truth. That's how they lie when they know we know. Imagine how they lie when there's no evidence to contradict them. And maybe that more than anything explains why Alex Pretti really was a threat. Because he was brandishing a weapon. A handheld, aluminum, 1080p, 60 FPS weapon of mass illumination. Because there is nothing more dangerous to a regime predicated on lies than witnesses who capture the truth.
At least 6 journalists have been violently attacked by agents in Minneapolis and St. Paul since the start of the year. That's according to Reporters Without Borders. Freelance photographer John Abernathy was violently tackled while covering the ICE protest, fearing what might happen if his equipment got confiscated. He threw his camera to safety. Several journalists, like Jana Shortall, have been hit with crowd control munition of some type, like pepper balls, stun grenade, shrapnel, or projectiles. Our guest this week is Jasmine Garsd, a correspondent for National Public Radio, and she joins us from Minneapolis. Hello to you, Jasmine. First of all, tell us what your experience has been reporting on the ground there in Minneapolis.
I mean, I think I've been reporting in the U.S. for about 10 years, and I've been covering immigration for several years, certainly during the whole duration of the Trump administration. And I've never seen anything quite like this in many aspects, right? Like I've never seen government repression on this caliber. And you were mentioning Orwell. It felt very Orwellian. I would go into these massive, massive protests, overwhelmingly peaceful. And then I would go home to my hotel to write the story, and I would see these press conferences talking about domestic terrorists, talking about violent insurrectionists, and that is simply not what I was seeing with my eyes. It's also been unprecedented in the response of the public, and in the level of community organization to help immigrants, whether it's in food pantries, volunteers, people standing on the streets, standing guard. I have never seen anything like this in an American city.
Yeah, and just to be clear for our viewers, you have covered ICE raids or protests in other cities. So how would you contrast Minneapolis
Yeah.
with those other reporting assignments?
Well, I mean, I think it's really important to note that this is escalating. I've covered Chicago, I've covered Florida, I've covered Washington, D.C. And I think there's a sense that, this is almost like a traveling circus, right? It goes from city to city and it's always the same. But it's escalating, and we saw it escalating in Minneapolis. We saw at least 2,500 agents deployed into a city that is far smaller than Los Angeles. We suddenly saw a memo leak saying that agents didn't need a judicial warrant to go into people's houses. We saw very violent tactics, we saw repression. And so I think it is very important to note that the brazenness has increased. Yes, 2 American citizens have been killed, and that is an escalation. I should remind people that last year, several migrants were killed in operations like these, and that it was one of the deadliest years in immigration detention in U.S. history. So the fact that now 2 U.S. citizens were killed, to me, signifies that there's an escalation in the brazenness.
Right. And the stated purpose from the administration in regards to these federal agents being on the streets is to make American communities safer. Does anyone feel safer where you are? Have you spoken to any Minnesotans who say they want ICE there?
No, I have not. I am yet to find a Minnesotan who feels safer. I think what's really interesting is, when Greg Bovino from Border Patrol was still on this, he was giving, a press conference daily. And he was giving all these press conferences, and there was a phrase, he kept repeating this phrase that was, we're doing this for ma and pa. We're doing this for ma and pa in America to feel safe again. And what was quite dystopian about this is that I would go to these protests in very cold weather, thousands of people, and I would meet ma and pa at the protests.
Yeah. Also wondering about, when you talked about how these communities are organizing. As I understand it, each neighborhood there has its own Signal group. That's the messaging app Signal. And now the FBI is saying it's going to be investigating or monitoring that Signal app. Should people be worried about that? Should users worry?
I think people should be worried about everything that Minneapolis represents. It represents an escalation of force against people exercising their right to protest. It represents an impunity. I mean, when Alex Pretti was killed, most of us at this point have seen the video. Almost immediately, there were press conferences calling him a domestic terrorist. Stephen Miller called him a would-be assassin, brandishing his gun. There was no evidence of this. There's been no evidence. So I wouldn't just focus on the Signal groups. I would go so far as to say everybody in the U.S. looking at Minneapolis has a right to feel quite concerned.
Yeah, and that's a big question, isn't it? I mean, how does the press responsibly report killings when officials are acting in bad faith?
I think believe your eyes. Believe your eyes. It's such a simple concept, right? I mean, I was at these protests. I was at these repressive actions, right? I mean, I was standing with protesters who were simply yelling things after a man got killed by gunfire, a civilian, and we were getting tear gassed and pepper sprayed. Believe your eyes and believe numbers. Believe numbers. Right now in the US, there is a historic number of immigrant detainees in detention centers, around 70,000 consistently, and around 70% of those people have no criminal conviction. So believe your eyes and believe the numbers.
And there's so much video circulating on social media. And this is always a difficult time when breaking news can't catch up with social media. How do newsrooms try to verify all this footage that's coming in? What are the challenges they face?
Well, we have a team that verifies all videos, right? I mean, I have definitely seen misinformation out there. I mean, one of the great things about working with a network like NPR is that we take our responsibility quite seriously. And so, even when the Alex Pretti video came out, we had a team that verified all the different angles. And I was able to go on air and say, with confidence, this man was pinned to the ground, face down, and he was shot what we count 10 times. And so when you think about the narrative from the administration and you take that other reality, it's very incongruous.
Jasmine, I want to thank you so much for joining us here on Scoop. Jasmine Garsd from NPR, joining us from Minneapolis. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
That brings us to our quote of the week, and it comes from the New York Times editorial board, which wrote a piece called "The Trump Administration is Lying to Our Faces. Congress Must Act." Quote, "Truth is a line of demarcation between a democratic government and an authoritarian regime. Mr. Pretti and Miss Good are dead. The American people deserve to know what happened." That's it for this edition of Scoop. Thank you for watching, and please stay tuned to France 24.